from the New York Times Learning Network. Welcome to Supporting Independent Reading and Writing. I'm Ross Flatt, Professional Development Manager. Now, like I've been saying all throughout this school year, the New York Times has something for everybody. If you go on our homepage, you'll see there's something that maybe will capture your interest, whether you know it or not. And if you look inside the paper even more, you'll find that it's just rich with graphics, with articles, with news. It might be an essay on sports legends. It might be latest fashion trends or what's going on with popular game shows. You might be interested in the crossword puzzle or the spelling bee. Whether it's cooking or a daily podcast, the New York Times has something that can captivate you, can captivate your students, and really inspire people to read and to write on a regular basis. And that's what this webinar is all about. Now, as always, we have a unit that goes along with this webinar. It's the 7th unit in our writing curriculum. You'll see that you can explore resources on independent reading and writing. It will give you resources such as 12 ideas for writing through the pandemic with the New York Times, or to inspire reading, such as what's your reading history, reflecting on the self as reader. You can also invite students to some low stakes practice through things like 21 things teenagers can do with a New York Times subscription. We have teen written mentor texts for this unit. And of course, information on our summer reading contest. And finally, we also have more places where students can send their work that are outside of this contest. So a lot of great things for you and your students to do and continue this conversation around the Times even after the school year is over. So in today's webinar, we're going to walk through our summer reading contest and the resources that accompany it. We're going to explore teen-friendly pieces in the Times that will expand students' selection and perspectives. And we'll also discuss steps for writing rich reading responses. Joining us today will be Katherine Schulten, editor of the New York Times Learning Network, and Natalie Proulx, senior staff editor at the New York Times Learning Network. Welcome, Katherine. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do first is we're going to have everybody engage in a quick interactive. And we'd like you to share in the group chat. What sections of the newspaper do you read first and why? And what types of articles or subjects do you always flip to or click on? So tell us a little bit about this in the group chat. We'll share some responses out and then we'll get going. So I'm seeing a few people starting to share already. A couple people have shared opinions. Somebody said the Learning Network, which is definitely near and dear to our hearts. I'm also seeing somebody starts with the art section right away. Fun stuff like styles, the crossword, anything that stuck out to the two of you?
See a lot of people say the first thing they notice is the headlines and the images.
I can't help but relate to the people who go to the fun first, because I felt during the pandemic that I had to start my morning either with Spelling Bee, which has nothing to do with the news, just to relax, or with the real estate section, so I could look at what $4 million might buy me in California, let's say. So I see you, people who go to frivolous sections first.
It's kind of like starting a meal with dessert first, and there's nothing wrong with that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our summer reading contest first. So Natalie, we've been running this contest for a couple of years. Can you tell us what do we need to know about this contest?
We have been running this contest for a long time, and I love it because it's so simple. So the premise is each week for 10 weeks throughout the summer, we invite middle and high school students to tell us what they're reading in the Times and why. So here's how it works. Every Friday, we post a new question that asks, what got your attention in the Times this week and why? Students have until the following Friday to choose something, anything in the New York Times, and write a short response to it and post their piece in the comments. That week, judges from the New York Times newsroom deliberate and they choose their favorite pieces. And then on Tuesdays, we publish the best response of that week and a whole list of runners-up and honorable mentions as well. So there are a couple rules you have to follow in order to submit to this contest. The first is that you can choose anything published in the New York Times, and we truly mean anything. So that includes articles, op-eds, videos, graphics, photos, podcasts, anything students can find in the New York Times that strikes their interest, it's all fair game. So the second rule is that in their reader responses, they have to be about 1,500 characters, or that's about 250 words, and that's because they post it in the comment section of our website, so it has to be within that word limit. And then they can participate every week or any week. Again, this contest runs for 10 weeks throughout the summer, so students can participate as often as they like, but we only allow one response per week. And then finally, this is open to middle and high school students who are aged 11 to 19 years old, anywhere in the world. And we also have a rubric that helps our judges pick the best entries, and it also helps students know what we're looking for. So I'm not going to go too in-depth on this because we're going to return to it later in the webinar, but just a quick overview. We're looking for personal connections to the article, telling us why students are interested in it. We're also looking for critical thinking and engagement with the text. We're looking for references to the Times source material that the students chose to show that the reader read closely. And we're looking for writing that has voice and style, that's fun to read. And finally, students have to follow all the guidelines for the contest that I just outlined.
All right, so we're going to come back to elements of this rubric later on. Now, again, we're going to use the term article sometimes, but really it can be anything in the Times. So Natalie, what have students written about in past contests?
Yes, so again, students can write about anything they can find in the Times that they like. So in the past, students have written about the protests in Hong Kong, vaping. They've written about Confederate monuments. They've written about Beyonce, having an accent, the M-dash, bagels. So really anything that they find in the Times that interests them in any form, they can write about it.
That's really awesome. Okay, so lots of choice for students to think about, and lots of ways that students can put their voice out there. But I'm going to channel my inner ninth grader. Why should students enter this summer contest? What are the benefits?
Always a good question. So one benefit is that they're writing for a real audience. So we know that so many teachers assign some kind of independent reading or writing over the summer, but usually students are just writing for their teacher, which can be fun, but maybe not all the time. So one of the benefits of this contest is that they're writing for judges who are from the Times newsroom. So reporters, journalists, editors, people who work at the Times. And every summer, both teachers and students tell us how meaningful it was for them, and that it makes an impact on not only their motivation to read and write throughout the summer, but on the quality of writing that they produce. It really elevates it. So that's just one benefit. Another one that I'll say is that they get to join kids from around the world. So since students are posting their reader responses in the comment section of our website, they can see the articles that other students are reading about and the connections that they're making to them. So last summer, especially during the pandemic, we saw how meaningful this was because there was so much happening, so much big news, but kids were pretty isolated because of the pandemic. And one student actually wrote to us at the end of the summer, and she said, after seeing other students' responses on race, the teenage experience, and the coronavirus, I felt a little less alone about my complicated feelings during this tumultuous year. So that's another great benefit. I know Katherine has more to mention.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue, because what we're telling you is not what we're making up in our head. It's what teachers and students have told us. And so something I've heard recently from teachers who participated last summer and are thinking about doing it this summer, is that the way one person, you're going to hear from him later, Joel Snyder, put it to me, is that everybody's world got smaller this year, everybody's. And some of those kids' worlds were pretty small to begin with. They weren't regular newspaper readers. They didn't know what was really happening outside, their immediate lives or communities. So it's just a spur to kind of feel like you're a part of the bigger world. And then another benefit that I wouldn't have put it quite this way, but a teacher did, and I love it, is just it's a very simple way to model what real readers do, like kind of a lifetime reading skill. Where everybody on this webinar is a real reader, right? Like we probably all devoted our lives to literacy. And when we pick up a newspaper, we follow our curiosity in certain ways, and we aren't daunted by things, and we know how to attack articles that are hard for us through photos or whatever. This models that and gives kids practice in it in a very low stakes way.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, I love how low stakes it is, and I love the different choices that students can do, and I think that is a really good point. That it's a great contest that brings people together. It's sort of like the best parts of our comment section on a regular basis, but as a contest. All right. So why don't we hear what it was like for a couple students who entered and won this contest. So we're going to hear from two past winners, Judy Wang and Nina Zwiecki, and they're going to tell us what it was like to enter and participate in this contest. Let's take a look and a listen.
Writing for yourself as well as for the contest is equally important.
Hi, my name is Nina Zwiecki.
My name is Judy Wang.
Even before the reading contest, I used the New York Times as like a source for my writing. I sort of mustered up the courage to at least submit one response because I wanted to voice my opinion, and I felt pretty strongly about the subjects.
I actually found out about the summer reading contest through my school. In my school, every junior who are taking the AP English class are required to submit to the summer reading contest and respond to different articles. And as a rising sophomore, I was intrigued by this requirement while looking through my school website, and I decided to give it a try.
One piece of advice I'd give to future summer reading contestants is to not be afraid to voice your opinions. I know personally it can be scary to state what's on your mind, especially if you disagree with someone. But as long as you're respectful and don't take the disagreement to heart, then you should ultimately be confident in your writing.
Really be vulnerable through your writing and explore your own voice and really make that personal connection. And I think that's what makes a piece of writing important to me, as well as makes it feel personable to the readers.
It was very surprising, and I was extremely happy and confident, actually. So, and when I got the email saying I won, I yelled out loud, much to my parents' chagrin.
Winning the summer reading contest was a huge encouragement for me and really allowed me to look at writing as something that is part of my interest and something I really wanted to explore more.
With language arts and writing kind of being some of my favorite subjects, it kind of really boosted my confidence in my writing abilities.
My main interest is actually visual arts, so I do a lot of drawing and painting, and I always thought, visual arts is the only source I could express myself in. This summer, through writing and through really being vulnerable through my words, I was able to discover a new way of explaining my emotions. And I guess winning really was just an extra push for me to go on and explore and tell my own story through words.
I love that line about telling my own story through words, and just sort of the thrill that students get by entering it and talking to each other. Now, something that some of the teachers we've talked to, and something that you've said, Katherine, is that this is an opportunity to explore the times as both a window and mirror. So can you talk to us a little bit about this? How can students use the times as both a window and a mirror, and what does this idea mean?
Okay, sure. And can I apologize? I live in Brooklyn and I can't obviously turn off my mic, but there are sirens. I don't even know what's going on, but we'll power through it, everyone.
Katherine, it's the New York experience.
You're right. I'm bringing it right to everybody's living room right now. I think many teachers who are probably many of you on this webinar already know this terminology. It was made famous by a woman named Rudine Sims Bishop, who is a professor at Ohio State University. And I'll read you her description, and then I'll tell you how teachers have kind of interpreted it for this contest. She says, books are sometimes windows, books or newspaper articles, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in their imagination to become part of whatever world has been created and recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So put simply, a mirror is something where you see yourself, your own concerns, your own interests. For most readers, that's pretty easy to find. And for most of the kids in our summer reading contest, they immediately go to mirrors, right? Something that's about a community they live in, or about an interest they have, or a hobby they have. Windows are something else entirely. That's choosing to read something that's outside of your own experience and inviting you to start thinking about other worlds. So that terminology is something that teachers have used, and we're going to invite you to do an exercise in a few minutes that actually asks you to look for a window, in contrast to what I think was kind of a mirror, what we asked you at the beginning. What do you naturally gravitate towards?
Yeah, and that's definitely something that got me thinking about, like, how do I approach reading the times or using the times, and really kind of thinking about it from, what would I normally go to, usually sports, what might be a window. All right. So my question to you is, what can students read for this contest? We've been saying anything. So what does that mean?
Yeah, and this is perfectly timed because in the chat, Jenna just asked, do you guys put these articles up at different reading levels? No, we don't. We expect the kids to read the times, but when we say read the times, we don't just mean articles. We mean there's something in there for everybody, and there's ways in for every kind of kid. So you can see from the things that just came on the screen, we really mean it. They can watch that video about the making of the song Driver's License. They can respond to a recipe they find in the food section. They can pick a graphic. Somebody said at the beginning of this chat that they love the upshot. If you don't know it, it's full of graphics and maps and whatnot. They can pick an interesting, intriguing photo that they just want to know more about and write about the photo. We've had winners in the past who did write about, something like what's on the screen right now. They can look in the style section. They can look in the sports section. Really, there is something that the publisher of the Times once said that I've glommed onto because I'm a former English teacher and I love it. He said, every week the Times publishes more than Shakespeare wrote in his whole lifetime. So I think right there you can see that it's just pretty endless what kids can pick, and they have 10 chances to do it over the summer.
So much great stuff. All right, so we're actually going to have folks give this a shot. So here's what we want everybody to do. We want you to go to the NewYorkTimes.com and find a Times piece of any sort that's outside your normal interests, but that looks potentially interesting. So this would be a window, right, Katherine?
Right. And we have to caution you, don't go off the homepage. We got worried as a team that if we allowed you to go anywhere in the Times, we'd never get you back. So stay just on nytimes.com.
Perfect. So find that Times piece that looks interesting but outside your normal interest. Put the headline in the group chat, and tell us why you chose it. So take about a minute, and we're excited to see what you post. All right, so we're starting to see some folks posting things. We have somebody who said how losing a pet cat can make you stronger. That person posted it because they hate cats. So they would never be interested in reading that. What else do we see?
I like the person who said, because I felt the same, see fewer people, take fewer showers. Basically clickbait, but also intriguing. Why would we want to see fewer people? What does that have to do with showers? Yeah.
Yep.
Some people, I think, are picking the ones they are interested in rather than the ones that would be a stretch for them. But that's okay. You're doing the basic exercise we ask kids to do. So,
well, I noticed somebody else picked an article that their son would be interested in checking out. And I think that's sometimes a good way to approach things is, like, what could I read that might help me, know a little bit more about somebody's interests by checking it out.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about this some more? So, Katherine, you just did a piece today that talked about how teachers are using this exercise. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can. I straight up stole this idea from a brilliant woman, Kim Butterfield, assigned this idea to her students. So she said, right now, go to the Times and find something well within your comfort zone, an easy article for you to read. It's about skateboarding and you love skateboarding. It's about fashion and you love fashion. But then go back and find something like what we just asked you to do that's not in your wheelhouse, that's not a thing you have background knowledge on or any natural interest in, and read it too and tell me what happens. And her kids were so enthusiastic about it that we invited 3 other teachers, but from 4 different regions of the country to try it. And 2 of 1, every teacher told us that the kids realized a lot of things that were very encouraging about doing this. And one is that it's not that hard to read outside your comfort zone. You can almost always find something to connect to. Second is, if it gets your attention, like many of us picked that wine and space article just now, if it gets your attention, even if you don't care about wine or space, there's probably going to be something in it that you learn, that you take away from it, that you like. But they also found that there was much more commonality between the one in their comfort zone and outside their comfort zone, in the sense that they're still the reader in control of the process, and we're making connections constantly, even between the 2 articles. So there's a girl who did pick that driver's license piece, and then she picked something about Joe Biden, and somehow she found a connection. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you one a girl picked. She wrote, if you ask me about anti-Asian racism, I could talk about it forever. If you ask me about some shot between UConn and Baylor, I think this was, I would have no idea what you're talking about and I wouldn't care. But then she went ahead and read that piece as a challenge to herself. And she said, I ended up connecting so much with the passion of these women. And like, I really could see why you would care. And like, she didn't become an instant basketball fan, but she expanded her world a little bit. So that's the advantage these teachers found in doing that simple exercise. And if you want your kids to do it, we posted this as a student opinion question today, which means any teenager anywhere can answer it publicly. And we hope you'll challenge your kids to do it.
This is a great sort of lead into the summer reading contest. And, you talked about this idea of kind of expanding your world. So I spoke to one of the teachers who was featured in that mentor text piece, Joel Snyder. Joel Snyder is a teacher in Los Angeles, and he talked about how this project, this Windows and Mirrors assignment, really exposed his students to so many parts of the world, and he uses it in his social studies classroom. So why don't we take a look and a listen at how Joel used this with his social studies students.
When I think about my role as a social studies teacher, I think about being sort of a portal to the world out there. That's both the world of Los Angeles that my students are very adjacent to, but often very excluded from for a variety of reasons. The world of the United States, and then, of course, the broader world. For the assignment Windows and Mirrors, I asked my students to choose 2 articles from the New York Times website, one that they saw themselves in, and one that they saw something very different from themselves or the world in. When students chose articles, there was such a range of what they selected, particularly for the mirror assignment. So some students, that was based on sort of personal interests, things like, video games or maybe sports. Others were based on age or based on race or ethnicity, but also others were so fascinating as they were based on something sort of internal rather than external, right? About mental health or about challenges during the pandemic. And so that was fascinating on the mirror side. On the Windows side, what I saw as a theme was students choosing articles that they saw no connection to themselves in, and then upon reflecting on them, always finding some interesting reflection upon themselves. One student, Yaelin, wrote about discrimination against Asian American women. Although in her world there are no Asian American women, she found deep connections to her own experience as a Latina, deep connections to how some of that discrimination and sexism felt for her. One of the amazing things about the Windows and Mirrors assignment for me was that it made me wonder how often I could do this assignment and how I could build it in as a routine in the classroom. Because it's so targeted in its essence, but then so wide and broad in its parameters, I'd love to see how students built a journal of Windows and Mirrors, what it might look like for students to sometimes dig into international news and sometimes dig into food or style. It's the easiest way to find ourselves around the world and in different neighborhoods and in different communities. It is likely to allow students to touch on things that they've never seen and to explore more widely, more broadly, and in certain cases more deeply.
Okay, so exploring more widely, more broadly, and more deeply. And after that exploration happens, the writing happens. So let's talk a little bit about writing rich responses. And before we talk to Natalie and Katherine about this, we're going to ask everybody here, what are you looking for when you ask kids for personal responses to reading? So share that in the group chat.
Just going to shout out some of the answers we're getting so far as the engagement with the topic that they're reading about, a sense of voice, which I know we love too, a connection to the topic, some kind of personal connection or relation of like the themes to your life.
Of course, like look at this chat is burning up because everybody has so many thoughts about it, and it's all stuff that we say over and over and over again too.
I'm seeing a ton of stuff about student voice showing up here. Again, making connections and connections specifically to the topic and the application.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Increased curiosity, responsibility, or empowerment is nicely put. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Why else do we read?
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Now, earlier in the webinar, Natalie, you walked us through the contest details, the rules, and the rubric. And the rubric had elements that kind of sound a little bit like this. So what habits do we want students to keep in mind when they're writing these responses?
Yeah, so really this contest is all about sort of helping students develop those good habits for independent reading and writing. And you all just named a ton of them that we try to encourage. So the first one is making a personal connection. I saw so many people mention that. And yes, that is really what we're looking for in this contest. What connection do you have to this piece? A second one is reading critically and showing us you're thinking about a topic. Again, I saw that in the chat, that kind of comprehension and understanding of the piece, and then asking questions about it. And 3, referencing specific details and quotes from the piece. Again, that kind of comprehension, really speaking to the text, having that engagement with the text, And then the last one is another one that everyone mentioned, writing in your natural voice and experimenting with style, writing in a way that's fun to read. And like we mentioned before, this contest is really low stakes. So this is a great place to start testing out those different writing skills. And like Ross said, this may look very similar to the rubric, and that's because these are the 4 things that are on a rubric that we're looking for. And students don't have to do every single one of these in their responses, but they should be trying out a couple of these. These are the kinds of things that we're looking for. And now we're going to look a little more closely at each of these different elements and looking at examples of student writing that demonstrate them. So the first one I'll talk about is making a personal connection. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but here we're looking for, why did you choose this article? What exactly interested you about it? And what's the relationship between this text and your own life? So we'll look at an example of a student who wrote about an article headlined, "Many Latinos couldn't stay home. Now virus cases are soaring in their community." And this student won one of the weeks of our contest last year. And as a Latina herself, she wrote about the impact that the coronavirus was having on her life. So she says, "My dad owns a dry cleaners, a business that has been deemed essential in my state. His employees are like family to me. We're connected through our heritage and through the language we share. It's scary to say goodbye to my father each morning, knowing he and his employees are exposed and vulnerable to COVID-19, and that some of them don't even have easy access to healthcare." So this is just an excerpt of her response, just a small part of it, so you can get a sense of the personal connection she was making. But again, this is just one example. Students are doing this all summer long. So for a couple other examples, last summer, a student wrote about what the Black Lives Matter protests were like in her town. Another wrote about what it was like to work at a restaurant as a teenager during the pandemic. Another one wrote about watching Hamilton on Disney Plus and what that was like for her. So as Katherine talked about in the last exercise, there are so many different ways to make personal connections in the times.
Yeah.
Right.
And I want to say that Patricia M. has provided a beautiful bridge to Habit 2 for us. In the chat, she says if they can relate to a topic, if they have that personal connection, it starts the conversation and then they can go more abstract, right? And yes, we know that as good readers ourselves. So Habit 2, you guys all talked about this, and it's hard to describe. If you were brand new to thinking about literacy skills, this might be hard to describe. But I think all of us as teachers know that response that's like, I read an article about cooking because I'm interested in cooking and it's going to help me cook better, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to need more than that. So what we try to help kids do, and there's a whole lesson plan that's full of mentor texts that Natalie and I are drawing from now that can explain how to do it, is we just tell them, show us your thinking. What were you thinking as you read this piece? Was it making you mad? Was it moving you? Was it teaching you something you didn't know? Was it coming at perceptions you had that are somehow, changed now that you've read this? And step back and just kind of observe yourself as a reader and tell us what was going on with you. A couple of good examples of that. One, you saw Nina, you just saw her on the video. She responded last summer and won for writing about an op-ed piece where somebody declared America needs a royal family. And Nina respectfully disagreed. And we love, let me just say, it doesn't happen often, but we love when kids disagree with the New York Times, when they don't see it as some thing that you could, that's perfect, that could never change, but they actually come at it. And if they do that and make a good argument, we're thrilled. What more critical thinking? So here's what Nina said. She said, "I largely disagree with her argument, and I would like to propose one of my own. We need to separate the ribbon cutting and the baby kissing from politics and remove them entirely. Even now, politicians' personal affairs distract from the more important political matters, and an American royal family would only compound this issue." I mean, what an eloquent young woman. So that doesn't happen often, but a great example of critical thinking is give us your own argument to tell us why the reporting or the opinion is wrong. Another good example, though, is from a few years ago, a kind of STEM kid example, I guess. This kid read a piece called Buzz Aldrin Returned from the Moon, and then his real adventure began. And I'll tell you what she said first, and then I'll explain what's not on the screen. She said, I was particularly fond of this article as it shed light on the human side of this astronaut. Through this article, we are shown that even those with great accolades and fame are susceptible to depression. What we love that she did, and other kids have done this too in other ways, is kind of talk about how she's always seen journalism work in her life. And she said, usually with famous people, it's all like a puff piece. It's accolades. It's how great they are. And, oh my God, he went to the moon. And she said, this is so refreshing. I read that he actually, had some depression and some mental health issues when he returned to Earth, which I think we could all understand an astronaut might, right? And so her kind of ability to step back and say, wow, this is what I notice about what's happening in my brain as I read this. It's like, oh, this isn't the usual article. This is refreshing to me. So it's that simple. They don't have a lot of words to get all this across, but just that we could see that she was doing that was great.
Yeah, I love that example too, both of those examples. And it kind of leads into the next habit. So the third habit we try to encourage is referencing specific details and quotes from the piece. So they can make a personal connection, they can come at the times critically, but we also want to know that they've read carefully and that they're really engaging with the article itself, and that they're responding to the details and the different information they found in the piece that they thought was new or notable or interesting in some way. So we'll look at an example. We picked this one because this student didn't respond to an article, but she responded to a map. And the map was an extremely detailed map of the 2016 election. And she writes, we might not always be as separate as we think. Another reason why I found the map so interesting is that it clashes with the classic voter maps we all see around election season, with each state colored either red or blue. Even though this may be helpful in showing electoral votes, it doesn't show the real US. The US isn't chunky blocks of red or blue. It's more complex with varied splatters of blue and shades of red. So we loved this because, one, she's thinking critically about what she's seeing and comparing it to other experiences that she's had with looking at voter maps. But then you can see she's really honing in on the details of this map. She's noticing there's different shades of the colors that show, how deeply blue or red a place is, and that they're not those chunky blocks, they're splatters. That's such a good use of voice too. But this is the kind of thing we love to see, is those details that students noticed, that they were challenged by, that they connected with, things that made them think.
Yeah, and it'll be no surprise to you guys, as Natalie just said, and as came up over and over in the chat, voice, right? This is a relaxed contest. This is not your buttoned up standardized test, like don't use the word I, last line of the first paragraph has to be your thesis. No, have some fun. And I'm going to say nothing more about it, but just read and put on the screen and read to you 3 more examples. This is this girl's first paragraph, a winner a few years ago. Sand, the most boring thing you never thought about. But as it turns out, our cities depend on it and we're running out. Cool kid to know you could make a 1-word first sentence, right? On why it's so hard to get a great bagel in California. This is by a Californian. She says, yeah, I admit, New Yorkers left us in the dust on this one. The glorious, good old New York bagel. How could anyone compete? It's beautiful and magnificent, even low-key majestic, if you will. And we deserve every ounce of criticism for our sad excuse of a bagel. I love the use of low-key, like that little bit of teen slang, which is perfectly okay in our contest. And then this last one was from last year, and it's a very serious, heartfelt piece, but she says, I just like the nod to teen world. She says, even as I write this, I have the urge to turn on Gossip Girl and hide, but I don't, because she's talking about, the racial strife and reconciliation and reckoning that we were all going through last summer. And I think she is not a kid of color who's saying, I just want to forget it, but I can't. So encourage your kids with this contest to really sound like themselves. If they're funny, they can be funny. If they're heartfelt, they could be heartfelt. We're here for it.
Yeah, I mean, the breadth and depth of what we're getting here, both of, the types of habits that the kids demonstrate in this contest that we're also looking for, and then also just the different variety of options that students have that I hope folks notice. So we saw some STEM articles in there. We saw something on food. We saw very current events, politics, really everything that we're hoping students can really respond to. Okay, so we're going to do our final interactive of today. And to do that, we're going to ask you to read the student mentor text. And as you read, we want you to think about how this student's response, this is Judy, who you heard from earlier, how her response showcases the 4 habits we just discussed: personal connection, critical thinking, reference to time, source material, and style. After you finish reading it, choose one habit and point to a place where this essay effectively shows it. We're going to give you a little bit more time for this interactive since you're going to be reading and writing. So we'll be back once we start seeing some comments in the chat. Okay, so Natalie, Katherine, what did folks notice in here that Judy did very effectively?
I mean, I think the first thing that everybody noticed is she makes that personal connection to her own memories, to her mother, and what that means to her. And she introduces it really nicely in the beginning, and then she comes back to it at the end and sort of shows how her thinking changed.
Yeah, I think it's her personal connection's so charming. It's hard not to just focus on that. But a bunch of you guys have noticed the 1-sentence paragraph that's so voicey. I hated it. And that's also such a sign of a very sophisticated writer, right? To even know that you could do that. But again, this contest is a chance to practice that stuff.
Yeah.
There's folks who referenced the fact that there's really good use of quoting from the article in here, especially in that 4th paragraph. And Judy quotes the article, but then also sort of, talks about it and frames it really nicely.
And I see people say she's thinking critically about the article too. She does kind of challenge the author's premise that these handbags are so important. And in the end, she comes to see that, really what's in them is what matters. So she kind of does all 4 things really well. Yeah.
So, Judy's kind of a writing ninja of the summer reading contest. She just does a really, really great job weaving them all in. But why don't we focus on one of her writing moves that I think a lot of people noticed in the chat, and that is making a personal connection. So Natalie, you spoke with Judy a little bit ago to talk to her about some of her writer's moves that she used here. So why don't we take a look and a listen, and then we'll be back.
Even in my most distant memory, Mama always carried this one bag. Covered in black and tan stripes, the Burberry tote looked more like a lunchbox than a handbag. I hated it. My name is Judy Wang. I wrote an essay on the Phantom handbag. The article that I responded to is about the disappearance of handbags from everyday life after the coronavirus pandemic hit. So a move I used was to vary the sentence length and include sort of punchlines in the beginning of the article. And the punchline I used was, "I hated it." I chose this line because it's able to evoke a very strong emotion in the readers as well as within myself. In the first paragraph of my essay, I described the bag as covered in black and tan stripes and went on to talk about the things specifically that are in my mom's bag. For one thing, it was constantly overflowing. Used tissue paper, bandages, hair ties, foundation, random files from work. After years of nagging my mom to get a lighter, more organized bag, the leather lunchbox with its increasingly fuller belly stayed. I described my mom's handbag in detail and tried to ground this memory in reality and make the readers feel like this is a personable and really relatable story. I chose to write about this article specifically because it evoked a memory about my mom and wanted to share my experience and my connection with the article. Though my mom's bag was a quixotic choice, I now know that within the countless frivolous objects is the wholehearted love of my mother. Tissues for my frequent water spills, bandages for cuts, and ties for my long hair. I wasn't giving a yes or no answer in regards to the issue that was brought up in the article I was responding to. But instead, I was able to dig deeper into my personal experience and conclude that the issue that they mentioned actually doesn't matter, and that the personal and the really minute feelings that were evoked and encapsulated in these seemingly phantom objects are actually more important. Whether handbags will see their destiny no longer matters, as the love that was carried with the nitty-gritty will remain constant. It was just super nice for my mom, who is in China, and I haven't been able to see her for over a year now, and for her to wake up to the news that, you know, her daughter was able to write about her and have that article be on the New York Times.
That last line, and you see her bedroom, it kills me.
All right. So Judy had some really great tips in there. Again, shows us, how you can really develop a great response with this essay. But before we take off for today, Natalie, Katherine, any final pieces of advice you might want to give the teachers or students who are watching this or thinking about entering the contest?
I will just say one more thing about Judy's video, which she said it didn't make it into the video, but in our interview, she said that she had entered this contest last summer, I think 6 times. And this is the last response she wrote, and it won. And she said that every other response she had labored over and edited, re-edited, rewrote, and thought so carefully about her article choice, and none of those won, but this one won. And she said it was just one of those she sort of wrote in one go, like she had that personal connection. It was really authentic, and like she just wrote in her natural voice. And that's the kind of thing that rises to the top in this contest, is like that connection and the meaning behind it really shone through. So I thought that was such an interesting little tidbit that she shared.
Oh, I love that story. That's funny, because I was going to say, early on in the chat, people were already saying, I use this contest, right? So some of you are familiar with it. Others of you, it's brand new. But I guess what I wanted to leave you with is just the idea that, like, as Natalie said when she brought up the rules, your kids only can enter just once. They can just try it out. Or they can be like Judy and enter every single time. But before school ends, you might want to have them do the windows and mirrors exercise, find something that they would like to write about, and start crafting it. I'm not suggesting here that you edit it or do anything like that, but get them started with it and then encourage them to submit it when the first contest opens. So they've already, off with a bang, and then maybe they'll just get the reading habit and want to keep going on their own.
Absolutely. Yeah. And something to, just again, something that teachers really want to keep in mind. One of the reasons this is such a great contest to do over the summer is we had one teacher, Karen Gold, told us that she kind of uses this as a way to get to know her students before they come to her in the summer. And I absolutely love that because, you could ask students, to write you a letter or, do some sort of a project, but she learned so much about what her students were into, what her students liked, what they didn't like. So it was this really great sort of embedded assessment that she was able to use this for. And I think that's a really great way to think about it. So that is it for today's webinar. So once again, Katherine, Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us throughout the year to talk to us about all of these different contests and our writing curriculum. So thanks again.
Thanks everybody for coming. Yeah. We really hope to see your kids on the site. So yeah, thank you. Happy summer. More to the point.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who've been joining us throughout the year, we've really appreciated it, and we are excited to come back with some new webinars and with some additional material for you. So this webinar was produced by Callie Holterman and Rachel Manley, video production by Callie Holterman and myself. From everybody at the New York Times Learning Network, I'm Ross Flatt. Thanks for joining us.